Hello and welcome to this second Sunday in Lent. During the second Sunday in Lent, we hear the beautiful readings of the Transfiguration, and I will get to the Transfiguration in a little bit. There was something in her eyes, and I can still remember to this day how her countenance changed. Some 19 years ago, I was at St. Augustine in Lebanon, Kentucky, and Kathy Spaulding from Lebanon came over and asked me to come to Louisville because somebody asked to see me. And so I drove over to Louisville with Kathy and we went to the Norton Pavilion. She left me in the lobby. Kathy does massages. She left me in the lobby and she went up and gave a massage to this young lady. And then Kathy came back downstairs and says, "Oh, she's ready for you." I went upstairs, and as I opened the door, Mom and Dad were standing in one corner. Her sister Sarah was in another corner, and right in the middle, there on the bed, was Michelle, a 25-year-old wife, mother, who was dying. And as I opened the door, she beamed up with life, and she says, "Javandi, come over here." And I went and I sat right next to her, and we talked about everything under the sun. We talked about football, about basketball, and in those days, American Idol was huge. We talked at length about American Idol and her dislike of Simon Cowell. She could not stand that man. And then it happened. It changed. There was a change in the room, and to this day, I can transport myself in an instant to that moment. It is one of those things, one of those experiences that remains alive probably for the rest of my life. There was a change in her countenance, something in her eyes. And she looked dead into my eyes and she said, "Father Chibundi, when the time comes, will you say my funeral?" We just went from talking about Simon Cowell and Owen laughing to something very deep. And Mom and Dad are in the corner crying. Her sister Sarah had a lump in her throat so big she could not even breathe. She was in tears. And Michelle was lying there as well in tears, and I'm holding her hand. And I remember saying to myself, this is so wrong. But something happened in that room. I had an experience of the Transfiguration. No, her clothes didn't become dazzling white. Her face didn't shine. She was the same old Michelle, frail, dying. But something changed. Presence became. I like that. There was something present in that moment. And that event, that experience has remained so very alive in my life. I can close my eyes and go back to that room and I can still feel the presence. I knew in that moment that room was filled with angels. There was God's presence. I just knew it. So when I was reading and preparing for the Feast of the Transfiguration, that event came back to life, and I think God was asking me to go back to that room at the Norton Pavilion with that young woman, 25 years old, a mother to a 3-year-old daughter and a loving husband. You know, there are certain things that parents need not hear. A parent need not hear their child saying, "When the time comes, will you say my funeral?" Because children are supposed to bury their parents. And here are the parents in that room having the hardest of time. Here is her sister, barely being able to breathe. And the young priest who doesn't know what to say. So I was reading about this Feast of the Transfiguration. And how do we make sense then of the Transfiguration? Or rather, have you ever been in a transfiguration moment? Have you ever experienced the transfiguration? I say in that room I experienced something of the transfiguration. Now, in order to understand what is going on in today's gospel passage, it is very, very important that we go back. We go back to events that happened before this feast of the transfiguration, Jesus going up the mountain and being transfigured. Something happened in what we, and those of you who study theology will know this immediately. Something happened in Caesarea Philippi. What happens in Caesarea Philippi? Caesarea Philippi is the place where Jesus announces for the first time that he is going to go to Jerusalem, that one of them was going to betray him. He was going to be denied. He's going to be arrested. He's going to be judged. And he's going to die. The very first time he spoke about this. Now, in order for us to understand how heavy this news is to the disciples, the Jesus before Caesarea Philippi is a very strong Jesus. If you look back into the scriptures, this is a Jesus who walks on water. This is a Jesus who always comes up on top with the Pharisees and the scribes. He always outsmarts them. This is a Jesus who, when his body dies, Lazarus, he goes and says, Lazarus, come to life, and raises Lazarus from the dead. Jairus' daughter dies. He goes over and he says to the little girl, Talita kum, little girl, I ask you, rise. And the girl comes back to life. This is a Jesus who, when somebody comes with a withered hand, Jesus says, stretch out your hand. The hand is stretched out, it's healed. A Jesus who gives sight to the blind, a very powerful Jesus. And for the disciples, as they are saying yes to the call of discipleship, all this is in play. They see all this, they see how powerful he is, they see how much power is emanating from him. And this is one of the reasons that they say yes to the call, because they think Jesus is going to Jerusalem. When he gets to Jerusalem, he's going to overthrow the Romans, he's going to sit in seat of authority, and they're going to end up as senators. When they get to Caesarea Philippi, he drops a bombshell, and it is a mighty big bombshell. He is dying. Peter, if you remember, stands in front of him and says, no, this is not happening. Stop talking crazy. Peter, right? Stop talking crazy. This is not happening. So after that, then Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up the mountain, and this happens. He probably takes the three people who had the hardest time coming to terms with suffering and death of a Messiah. A Messiah, remember, was supposed to live for 1,000 years. The people who are having the hardest of time and accepting the suffering Messiah, the dying Messiah, probably are Peter, James, and John. So he takes them. He takes them up this mountain, not to show them that he can converse with Elijah and Moses, and his clothes can become dazzling white. And sometimes we get so caught up in the theatrics of that, right? And I'm not denying that that happened. But that is not the intention of Jesus, I think. Jesus takes these up the mountain to show them something. And as I read and understand scripture, I think he takes them up the mountain to show them that even when it seems as if he has lost everything, even when it seems that he has been a big failure, that God is still in control of events. That's why Elijah shows up and Moses shows up to show that this is the fulfillment of the scriptures. The disciples need to know that even in suffering and great pain, that God has not abandoned Jesus, that God is still in control, and that in fact, this suffering and death of Jesus of Nazareth, which he has predicted at this point for the first time, in the grand scheme of things, God saw it and God willed it. Let's go back to that room. I have often asked myself why I was in that room. I've often asked myself, why were the parents in that room? at Norton Pavilion, could they be spared that moment? No, no parents want. You know, the most troubling thing as a father is when your child is going through something and there's absolutely nothing you can do to stop it. You know it's coming. You feel so helpless. But Mr. and Mrs. O'Donnell and Sarah needed to be there. And I can tell you what, after Michelle realized what she had said, what she had asked of the priest, right? She realized it had gotten too dense in that room. So she cracked a joke. And she was like, I'm just being silly. No. But now she started consoling the people in the room who were there to console her and strengthen her. She became a source of strength for everybody in the room. But she understood something, right? She understood that that her time had come. That even in this great moment of suffering and disappointment that she won't grow to see her daughter go to school, that somehow God is still in control. Let me ask you this, actually, very personal question. When do you know that you have been at the Transfiguration Mountain, or you have experienced the Transfiguration? When do you know? Can I suggest this? If there's anybody out there who has ever bargained with God, if you have you ever bargained with God? God, if you do this for me, we don't bargain with God when things are going dandy, right? We are at the very bottom and we just want a break. If you have ever bargained with God, you have experienced the Transfiguration. So when Jesus takes, and I'm jumping back and forth, when he takes these up the mountain, he wants to show them that God is still in control of events. And for me, even as we go back to Caesarea Philippi, when Peter says to Jesus, don't do it, don't go, I don't see Jesus coming to Peter and say, get behind me, Satan. I don't hear that. What I see is Jesus come towards Peter, hold him by the shoulders and say, Peter, I'm going to teach you a new prayer. You don't know it yet. It has not been written, but I'm going to teach you a new prayer. It is called the prayer of serenity. Lord, grant me the courage to change the things I can change. I want to work to the bone to change the things I can change. Michelle fought cancer. She gave life a fighting chance. She gave cancer a terrible time. If she could change things, she changed them. We also have to know that we need to accept that there are things that we cannot change. Jesus knows there is pain and suffering in his life. Yes, he has changed a lot. What he can change, he has changed. He wants to accept the things he cannot change and the wisdom to know the difference. So what happens then at the Feast of the Transfiguration? Jesus looks at his disciples and he says to them, you will feel abandoned. You will feel alone. You will feel betrayed, even by God. But I need for you to know this, and I need for you to remember this. Whenever you are going through a rough time, you are not alone. That is it. That is the message. Whenever you are going through the roughest of times, you are not alone. It might feel as if you are alone. Certainly for Michelle in that room, even when her parents were there and her sister is there, she probably felt alone. 2 weeks later, I was saying her funeral. A voice comes from the clouds. This is my son. Listen to him. Listen to what he's saying, that you and I can find the redemptive element in suffering and in death. So Jesus is preparing the disciples, ergo preparing you and I, that you and I will go through the passion. You and I will go through moments of great anxiety, moments of loss, moments when we feel powerless. But we need to remember that God is still in control. I was talking to a priest friend of mine several years ago. He had gone back home to Ireland to visit his family. He has a sister there who was in the nursing home, and the sister was had Alzheimer's. So on the last day before he came back to the United States, he went to visit with the sister, and the sister was gone. The body was there. She was gone. She didn't even know he was in the room. And dealing with Alzheimer's is tough. So on this very last day, he goes over and he holds the sister by her head in his palm, the palm of his hands. He's blessing her. He's a priest, blessing her. And then he leans in to her sister and says, "Mary, I love you." And as he's holding her head, tears began streaming from Mary's eyes, filling up his palms. And for a split moment, she found him. He found her. He knew us. He knew that his sister was in there, lost in Alzheimer's. Until you have touched the tears of another, you don't know what suffering is. Until you have changed the diapers of another, you actually don't know what love is. And we can connect in this love, we can connect in this suffering, and we can find God in this suffering. So as we pray the scriptures for the Feast of the Transfiguration, I want you to go back to your moment of transfiguration, one that you will never forget, when things just changed. And you knew that things may not end the way you had wanted, but you knew in your heart of hearts, it's okay. It's okay, because God is here. Welcome to this second Sunday in Lent.